Hey everyone, I'm Quinn. Welcome back to my channel. I've spent the past few days doing pretty much two things exclusively, those being prepping for an upcoming D&D game and playing a new video game called Triangle Strategy that just came out. I really enjoy Triangle Strategy so far. I'd recommend it to anybody who has a Switch and enjoys tactical RPGs. However, playing Triangle Strategy really got me thinking about choices and agency, both in video games and in tabletop games. It's a game where the player has a lot of input into the story's direction, but ultimately there are still only a few ways for the narrative to resolve. That can pretty directly be applied to tabletop role-playing games, and I thought that it would be an interesting topic to cover here, especially through the lens of education. My two callings in life, and two things that I'm quite passionate about, are education and running TTRPGs. So it's always fun to compare and contrast the two. And before we get into the video proper, I'd ask to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, if you haven't already. I really enjoy making videos on these two topics specifically, and I plan on doing a lot more of it in the future. So let's get into the topic at hand here. In recent years, discovery learning has been a big buzzword in educational spheres, and I think that's for good reason. For the uninitiated, this is when students take time in the classroom to figure out course material on their own, with some but little guidance from instructors. This is often contrasted with the traditional lecture model, which is still widely used in classrooms across the country and world. Students experimenting, researching, and unearthing material for themselves creates lasting retention of course materials. It allows them to form their own conclusions about subject matter rather than being forced to memorize a list of formulas or dates. As somebody who's currently studying to be a history teacher, I think that studying a lot of dates can be a very unproductive model in that it can lead to just a real lack of learning after a test, and that you kind of just pack everything in for one specific deadline and don't really need it for anything in the future, so you just forget it to stuff more dates in. As I've done in the past in this channel, students are not dissimilar to players in this case, especially when considering Dungeons & Dragons as a form of discovery education in itself. The key to both running a game of D&D and discovery learning is acting as a guide for those involved. In the case of students, it's important to give them context and information up front, providing any necessary support as they work to discover what they seek. The same goes for running Dungeons & Dragons. The Dungeon Master has no defined character in the game, so similar to discovery learning, they do not directly influence the players or their students. The power they have over the game world gives them influence over the course of the events in a variety of subtle ways, similar to things the teachers can do while using discovery learning. The term railroading has always been an interesting one to me. This means, in a TTRPG sense, that a DM or GM is essentially guiding players down a premeditated path and they have no way to deviate from it in any way possible. They are forced to go through whatever the game master thinks the story should be. I think in the purest sense of the word, it's not necessarily a bad thing if done correctly. The main thing I don't think players want to know is that they're on a railroad at any given time. The important part of the game is their suspension of disbelief in order for everyone at the table to have fun, play a game, and tell a story. Where players tend to take issue is when it feels as if they have a lack of agency. If all of their actions result in exactly the same outcome, regardless of any choices they make. A good DM is able to anticipate and plan for most likely outcomes and tweak what exists, what plans they've already made in order to adapt to unexpected ones. An educator using a discovery method does the same thing. You know the conclusion you aim to achieve, and you're aware of the information you want your students to glean, but you don't necessarily want them to know exactly how to do it, nor do you want to walk them there. You can lead a horse to water and all that. I think a great example of this tactic in motion can be seen in the most recent episode of Critical Role. Minor spoilers for Critical Role Campaign 3, Episode 15 for those who care. In the first hour of the session, the party made a plan to take a mission a decent distance away from their current location in the hopes of letting the heat die down in the city and allowing plots there to simmer in the background for a while. However, on their way out of town, once the decision was made, they were confronted by these two investigator NPCs who were part of a pre-established organization. Once trust was built, these investigators offered a helping hand on several ongoing plots within the city, in exchange for the party's help with their investigations. After some deliberation, further from what they had previously decided on, the group settled on remaining in town to delve further into the ongoing investigations. As far as I'm concerned, this is a perfect example of the course-correcting discovery education, especially in a D&D context. Matt Mercer didn't physically prevent them from leaving the city, nor did it make it seem as though their choices had little value. Rather, he essentially prompted them again and gave them another opportunity to make the same decision, this time with a bit more information, and that information in this case made all the difference. I'm sure they just prepared for both outcomes, as he's an outstanding dungeon master, but this is a good warning that plots within the city would continue to advance at a dangerous rate in their absence. Furthermore, I think this can be done to the great benefit of the players themselves. Particularly, it seems as though Matt has interwoven the individual plots and backstories of several of the characters into this single location, the city of Dressar, and to leave that would forsake the potential dramatic moments in delving into individual characters and players. And the best part of this is that it remained entirely the player's decision. He merely provided guidance in one direction, and in my experience, most cases, players tend to organically follow where they're being guided by the DM. The core thing I'm getting at here is that the key to discovery learning and playing Dungeons & Dragons is the same thing. The person seeking the information should go on a journey and to the best of their knowledge feel as though they arrived at their conclusion independently. This creates an entertaining, engaging, and most importantly, memorable experience for players and students alike. I really like this graph. It succinctly articulates the entire process of discovery learning as posed by Jerome Bruner. The learner begins with a conceptualization, experiments, has a concrete experience, and reflects on said experience. At that point, the cycle repeats itself. Someone playing Dungeons & Dragons is essentially going through this process over and over again, learning new things about your world each time they do so. This continual process is a big part of why I love D&D, as I think this discovery process is both engaging for players if done correctly, and gives me as a Dungeon Master a great way of being able to build out my world through organic discovery in both methods that I had anticipated beforehand and things that I had entirely not seen coming. Thing that's great about discovery learning, and I think this ties back to the railroading idea I touched on earlier, is that it gives both players and students kind of an organic feeling experience. I think that they really enjoy feeling as if they've kind of found something on their own and they're influencing their own education, because in a lot of cases, whether it be in the lives of students or in just daily lives for adults playing Dungeons & Dragons, it can feel as if we're very out of control of our own lives. I think that students are very much prescribed exactly what they have to learn throughout most of, I'd say all of schooling until maybe college or maybe high school where you have a few elective slots, unless you're like me and all of your elective slots are filled by band classes that you kind of have to take if you want to do marching band. In adult life, it's similar in that a lot of the world is not up for us to kind of choose on. We're able to choose our job, yes, but to a degree, people feel stuck in things. And I think that railroading just creates that same feeling of being stuck in people to create that same kind of discontent that is inherent to any situation where you don't have influence. That's why I think that when essentially guiding players down a path, it's important to make it seem as though their choices have the complete agency of any situation that they're in. Make it seem as though any new outcome is entirely original for whatever scenario they have found themselves in, regardless of if you've edited it. The example I always see online is, oh, you're in a dungeon and there's a room to your left and there's a room to your right. And if you go to the left, it's the same room as to the right. But I think that that's a very good overall thing to be able to do, to be able to just adapt things in small ways to make them fit a plethora of circumstances. And I think that discovery education is much the same, in that adapting things to different groups of students can be quite effective, in that if you find that one of your classes is much more interested in, say, the history of like literature in a certain period rather than the history of the progression of science in that same period, you could tailor the lesson to kind of discovering more things in that realm rather than the scientific realm, regardless of what you'd plan to do perhaps at the start of a class. This has gotten a little rambly, but that was my main thought and point here. So that was the video on discovery learning in D&D. What do you think? Do you agree with my conclusions, and why? Be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel, as I said at the top. I really enjoy making content here. You may have noticed this video is quite different from my usual style, and that's for good reason. I'm currently home for spring break, so I don't really have a recording area set up at my house at this point, so I'm just able to record audio, and I'm going to put in images later and kind of mix things up a bit. I just wanted to see how people like this new format as well, see if they prefer it, if they prefer the old stuff. Be sure to let me know on that front as well. I can also mix it up a fair bit, switch between the two. I really look forward to making more regardless of the format it is, and I hope you all stick around. Thank you all for joining me, and I hope you all have a good rest of your day.